Chapter 1. The Arrival. My name is Jenny, and I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural. That was until I stepped foot into the house on 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I first saw the house. The leaves were turning shades of orange and red, and the air had that distinct, earthy smell of fall. The house itself was an imposing structure, with its iconic quarter-moon windows staring down like eyes, watching my every move. I had come to Amityville as a paranormal investigator, drawn by the infamous stories of the Lutz family and their terrifying experiences. My goal was simple: to debunk the myths and prove that there was a logical explanation for everything. Little did I know, I was about to embark on the most harrowing journey of my life. As I approached the front door, a chill ran down my spine. I shook it off, attributing it to the cool breeze. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The air inside was stale, as if the house had been holding its breath, waiting for my arrival. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. Chapter 2. The first night. That first night was uneventful, or so I thought. I set up my equipment in the living room, placing cameras and audio recorders in strategic locations. I wanted to capture any signs of paranormal activity. As the night wore on, I found myself growing increasingly uneasy. The house was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night. I settled into one of the upstairs bedrooms, the one that had belonged to the Lutz children. The room was cold, much colder than the rest of the house. I wrapped myself in blankets and tried to sleep, but a sense of foreboding kept me awake. It was around 3 a.m. when I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible. I sat up, straining to hear. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from the hallway. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously opened the door. The hallway was empty, but the whispering continued, now accompanied by a soft, rhythmic tapping. I followed the sound down the stairs and into the basement. The air grew colder with each step, and the whispering became a chorus of voices, all speaking in hushed tones. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I reached the bottom of the stairs and froze. There, in the corner of the basement, was a figure, a dark silhouette, barely visible in the dim light. Chapter 3. Escalation. The figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me shaken. I hurried back upstairs, my heart pounding. I reviewed the footage from my cameras, but there was nothing, no whispers, no figure, nothing to explain what I had experienced. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Over the next few days, the activity in the house escalated. Doors slammed shut on their own, objects moved inexplicably, and the whispering voices became a constant presence. I felt like I was being watched, followed by unseen eyes. Sleep became impossible, and I found myself growing increasingly paranoid. One night, as I was reviewing my notes in the living room, I heard a loud crash from the kitchen. I rushed in to find the cabinets open, their contents strewn across the floor. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I could see my breath in the air. Then I heard it, a low growl, coming from the shadows. I backed away slowly, my heart racing. The growl grew louder, more menacing. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was outside, gasping for breath. I knew I couldn't stay in the house any longer, but I also knew I couldn't leave without uncovering the truth. Chapter 4. The Climax. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I decided to conduct a séance. I gathered my equipment and set up in the living room, lighting candles and placing a Ouija board on the coffee table. I took a deep breath and began to ask questions, hoping to make contact with whatever was haunting the house. At first, there was nothing. The planchette remained still, and the room was silent. But then the candles flickered, and the planchette began to move. It spelled out a single word: leave. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and turned to see the dark figure from the basement standing behind me. I tried to run, but the figure grabbed me, its grip icy and unyielding. I struggled, but it was no use. The room spun and I felt myself being pulled into darkness. I heard the voices again, louder this time, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. Chapter 5. The Resolution. When I woke up, I was lying on the front lawn, the house looming over me. I had no memory of how I got there, but I knew I had to leave. I gathered my things and drove away, vowing never to return. As I looked back at the house one last time, I saw the dark figure standing in the window, watching me. I never did find out what haunted the house on 112 Ocean Avenue. But I knew one thing for certain. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. The experience changed me, leaving me with a deep-seated fear of the unknown. I still hear the whispers sometimes, in the dead of night, reminding me of the horrors I faced in Amityville. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. Leaving Amityville behind was supposed to bring me peace, but the horrors I experienced there followed me. The whispers that haunted my nights in the house now invaded my dreams, turning them into nightmares. I would wake up drenched in sweat, the echoes of those voices still ringing in my ears. I tried to return to my normal life, but everything felt different. The world seemed darker, more sinister. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the dark figure from the house was still with me. My friends and family noticed the change in me, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the full extent of what had happened. Who would believe me? Chapter 7. The Investigation. Determined to find some answers, I began researching the history of the Amityville house. I discovered that the land it was built on had a dark past, long before the Defeo murders and the Lutz family's ordeal. Native American tribes had once used the area for rituals, and there were rumors of a curse placed on the land. I reached out to other paranormal investigators and experts, hoping to find someone who could help me understand what I had experienced. One name kept coming up: Dr. Evelyn Carter, a renowned parapsychologist who had studied some of the most haunted locations in the world. I contacted her and explained my situation. To my relief, she agreed to meet with me. Chapter 8. Seeking Help. Dr. Carter was a tall, imposing woman with a no-nonsense attitude. She listened intently as I recounted my experiences in the Amityville house. When I finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "You encountered a powerful entity," she said. "One that has been feeding off the fear and suffering of those who lived in that house for generations. It's not uncommon for such entities to attach themselves to individuals who have been in their presence. Is there any way to get rid of it?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "There are ways," she replied, "but it won't be easy. You'll need to confront the entity and sever its connection to you. This will require a ritual, one that must be performed in the house where it all began." The thought of returning to the Amityville house filled me with dread, but I knew I had no choice. If I wanted to be free of the entity, I had to face it head-on. Chapter 9. The Return. Armed with Dr. Carter's instructions and a renewed sense of determination, I made my way back to Amityville. The house looked just as foreboding as I remembered, its windows staring down at me like eyes. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the familiar chill washing over me. I set up the ritual in the living room, lighting candles and drawing protective symbols on the floor. Dr. Carter had given me a list of incantations to recite, and I began to chant them, my voice trembling. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive. As I continued the ritual, the dark figure appeared once more. its presence filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. I forced myself to keep chanting, even as the figure moved closer. The candles flickered, and the room seemed to warp and twist around me. Chapter 10: The Confrontation. The figure reached out, its icy hand brushing against my skin. I felt a surge of fear, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the incantations. The figure recoiled, its form flickering like a shadow in the wind. I could feel its anger, its desperation to hold on to me. With one final, powerful chant, I completed the ritual. The figure let out a deafening scream, and the room was filled with a blinding light. When the light faded, the figure was gone, and the house was silent once more. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. The entity was gone, and I was finally free. I gathered my things and left the house, vowing never to return. Chapter 11: Moving Forward. In the weeks that followed, the nightmares and whispers gradually faded. I began to feel like myself again, the darkness that had clouded my life lifting. I stayed in touch with Dr. Carter, who helped me process my experiences and move forward. I decided to write about my ordeal, hoping that my story would serve as a warning to others. The Amityville house was a place of unimaginable horror, and I wanted to ensure that no one else would suffer as I had. As I finished the final chapter of my book, I felt a sense of closure. The house on 112 Ocean Avenue would always be a part of my past, but it no longer held power over me. I had faced my fears and emerged stronger for it. And so I moved on with my life, forever changed by the horrors I had faced, but no longer haunted by them. Chapter 12: The Twist. Months had passed since my harrowing experience at the Amityville house. Life had returned to a semblance of normalcy, and I was finally able to sleep through the night without the whispers haunting my dreams. My book about the ordeal was well received, and I felt a sense of closure. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, my phone rang. It was Dr. Carter. Her voice sounded urgent, almost frantic. "Alex, you need to come to my office immediately," she said. "There's something you need to see." Curiosity and a hint of dread filled me as I made my way to her office. When I arrived, Dr. Carter was waiting for me, a stack of papers spread out on her desk. "What's going on?" I asked. She handed me a photograph. It was a grainy black and white image of the Amityville house, taken decades ago. In the window, I could see the dark figure, the same one that had haunted me. "This photo was taken in the 1920s, Dr. Carter explained. "Long before the Defeo murders or the Lutz family's ordeal. The entity you encountered has been there for a very long time." A chill ran down my spine. "But I thought we got rid of it," I said, my voice trembling. Dr. Carter shook her head. "We only severed its connection to you. The entity is still there, waiting for its next victim." As I processed this information, thought struck me. "Why did it choose me?" I asked. Dr. Carter hesitated before answering. "I did some research on your family history, Alex. It turns out that one of your ancestors lived in that house in the early 1900s. The entity has a connection to your bloodline." The room seemed to spin around me. "So it was never about the house," I said, realization dawning on me. "It was about me." Dr. Carter nodded. "The entity will always be drawn to you and your descendants. You may have escaped it for now, but it will never truly be gone." I left her office in a daze, the weight of this revelation pressing down on me. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I arrived, I found a note on my doorstep. It was written in a familiar, spidery handwriting. "You can never escape me." I looked around, but there was no one in sight. The shadows seemed to close in around me, and I knew that my ordeal was far from over. The entity was still out there, waiting, watching, and it would never stop until it had claimed me once and for all.